All right, fungi and gals, here we are with the kingdom fungi. There are over 50,000 species of fungus. Anything I'm about to say to you, anything in your textbook, is merely a generalization. And really, we talk about the fungi here in microbiology, particularly when we think about things like molds and yeasts. And you're thinking, well, but I can actually see, right, the mold on this bread. But in order to make identifications and those sorts of things, you would need a microscope to see this close enough. You might be familiar with macroscopic fungi like mushrooms, which this course is not going to cover. So speaking of generalizations, a couple things about fungi, right? They're going to all have cell walls made out of chitin. Here in this image, we see the two main morphologies, body types of fungus. So some are going to be these long thread-like structures. Those are called hyphae. And other fungi are going to be yeast, right? They're going to be these round, you can actually see this one, he's budding. So they do asexual reproduction. They just divide, kind of similar to a bacteria in that way. If you're in the forest and you like turned over a log and you saw this whole white mat, we call that mycelium, and that's just a big mat of these hyphae. And typically when you're looking at that in a forest, that is then actually going to be what provides the energy for a fruiting body, like a mushroom, to sprout. And those mushrooms would be doing some sexual reproduction, etc. So there's a lot of diversity inside of this group. Another thing about fungi, they are all going to be heterotrophic. So do you remember in Gen Bio you talk about autotrophs, things that do photosynthesis, they get their own energy or they make their own energy from the sun? Well, a heterotroph then is going to need to basically consume another organism for its nutrients. Humans are heterotrophs as well. Animals are heterotrophs. And fungi can do this in two different ways. And actually, we can kind of use these pictures for this as well. So some are going to be what we call saprobes, and they are going to be getting their nutrients from a dead organism, right? So this piece of bread is really just dead wheat. It's been baked, et cetera, et cetera. But we're getting our nutrients from that other organism, just like if you ate a cheeseburger, right? It's a dead cow, it's dead wheat, it's dead dairy, right? Okay, so those are saprobes. But some of the fungi, like the one causing this athlete's foot, are going to be parasitic, right? And a parasite, the definition is just that it lives in or on a host. And so here we see it infecting this individual's foot. Now, it's interesting if you think about this fungus being a heterotroph and us being heterotrophs, right? We're each digesting other organisms to get our energy, right, and our nutrients. But what we're going to see is these fungi, instead of, right, they don't have a mouth, they don't consume this piece of bread. Instead, they're growing on the surface. And so they're going to be producing enzymes, some similar to what we make, but instead of keeping them in a stomach or in the intestines, right, in a tube, they're basically spilling them out into their surroundings onto whatever it is that they want to consume. This is super important in the decomposition process. In fact, fungi, people are studying fungi to find out what other things we might be able to break down, some of our waste, some of our debris, things that we don't necessarily have a good way of getting rid of. Okay, so that, frankly, is the really fascinating part about fungus. If you are at all interested in thinking more about, oh, there's that mycelium, right? This mat of hyphae. If you're at all interested, you should read some things by Paul Stamets. He is a mycologist, someone who studies fungus, and he has done some of this really interesting kind of groundbreaking research with fungi and how humans might use them to improve our environment. So definitely check them out, because what we're going to talk about here in class is not this beautiful role that they play in decomposition and ecosystems, but really more some of the diseases, right? So your athlete's foot there, for example, we find a lot of the fungal infections are superficial. Our bodies seem to be pretty good at fighting them off. Infections by fungi are called mycoses, right? So Paul Stamets is a mycologist. So anytime you see myco, that's a reference. So mycoses, these fungal infections, athlete's foot is a really common one. There's a fascinating one you should look up called valley fever. And this is actually a lung infection. Actually, I should post a paper for you. It's a lung infection. It typically is more problematic in people who are immune compromised. But valley fever is a really interesting one. We've been kicking it up in dust during building housing developments in Arizona and things like that. And it can be lethal. So, other ones you might be interested in. So there's, for example, a fungi that makes a poison called aflatoxin. And the fungus lives on peanuts. And so peanuts can end up being filled with a toxin. This actually, it's not like an acute toxin, but over time it can actually increase rates of liver cancer. So there are multiple reasons that we might be interested in fungus. And then, of course, we use them to bake bread and make cheese and wine and all those sorts of things. So fungi are really neat, and that's all I have time to say about them in this class.